must be Tuesday night. We're going one short, but it's going to be a hell of a show nonetheless. This means more time for you guys, Brad and Sam. So go in depth with your answers. Is that all right? How you guys doing?
Good, good. Glad to be here. You can take lots of time too.
Yeah, let me get to answer some questions tonight, Jay.
Wait, hey, I'm just the MC, like that way I stay out of the limelight. You guys are the face. I mean, you guys got a face for what is this, film, I guess? I got a face for radio.
Oh, hell no.
But anyway, let's get right into it. Sam, why don't you kind of just do the nickel sales pitch on IOC?
Man, it's really not anything to sales pitch about, right? It's just straight facts. We give guidance to any family that needs directions without any strings attached at an hour at a time on demand. We're not going to ask you to sign a case management agreement for months and months and months. We're not itching to just get in there and do an intervention, although nothing takes the place of that formal sit-down intervention with family members present. A lot of families don't need that. Every family needs guidance. We give it an hour at a time at an affordable rate to anyone. It's just goodness.
It's pure goodness.
It is goodness. Well, let's see. One of these questions, let me see. Let me do the producer job. This one is a good segue. So, how do you decide if a family can do an intervention on their own compared to having to have an interventionist do the intervention? Sam, can just keep going with your flow?
Yeah, I've had a couple of them just this week, that I had two book an intervention and they were adamant that, and I was in full agreement because just there's so much history of poor communication and so much hostility between everyone that it just wasn't a place to where they could have effectively communicated that without having a neutral party present. We get a lot of families, and I've had several this week actually, and it's only Tuesday, right? The week is young. That there was a level of respect among the family, but even the addicted individual, it hasn't wretched. It hadn't reached the point of like no turning back with the communication, and they were able to switch up some communication and communicate effectively, and their loved ones are gone to treatment.
So is there anything that you look for? Any kind of things that jumps out as to maybe I need to be there compared to this family can do it?
They have a history. If the patient has a history or the identified patient has a history of, I'm looking for that, right? Of an identified patient has a history of being verbally abusive a lot, easily triggered, and the family easily triggered in their reaction to that. And most families that come to me are like that to some degree. But how do I say this? A family that has the ability to correct that with just some guidance and has a clear understanding, or a more clear understanding than maybe some other families of what the real problem is, and also identifying their roles into that family problem and a willingness to take corrective measures. Not all families come to me at the same level of readiness and the same level of understanding. So just it's a lot of it is on the addicted individual and how they're showing up and how they can be, I say, maneuvered, and then how the family is showing up and able to be maneuvered equally.
So Brad, you get the family calling. How do you decide if this family can kind of do it on its own, maybe do a couple of sessions on IOC, or when you need to step in? Like, how do you kind of decipher?
Well, I think Sam laid it out really well. The reason this thing is here is primarily for families that can't afford to bring us in. That's a big part of it, and we want to be able to give them everything we've got without them having to pay to have us come to their location. But if you've got a family that when you're talking and basically doing an assessment that we all do, and there's been multiple attempts at trying to help this individual see a different pathway to get better, and they've manipulated their way out of that situation again and again and again, and the family has fallen for it again and again and again. It makes us get to a point where we feel like without some real guidance in person, that person is going to run the room if they try to do an intervention on their own, because we're really good at that in active addiction. We can manipulate everyone around us, and we get better at it, I think, the more progressed we get in our addiction. But I think, it's funny. We talk so much about how important the family system is and how much work we put into helping the entire system. And I wonder sometimes, and crucify me or whatever for saying this, but we scare people off, I think, sometimes. We are there to help that system, and that requires work from everybody involved. And sometimes I think we run families off because we talk about we need their involvement, we need their engagement, we need them to do things differently too. But don't be that family. Don't be that family that runs when it comes to a real situation where we realize if we don't change the way we've reacted to our loved one, the cycle will persist. And so, anyway, that's my soapbox about scaring people off. I've thought about that a lot over the years. How many people have we talked to and they didn't want to look at the situation for what it is. They just wanted to focus on the addicted individual and say, this is Johnny's problem and we just got to get Johnny to treatment. And then they don't do anything, and then something happens. And that's what we're trying to avoid. We don't want anything to happen. We don't want it to get worse than it already is.
Well, bro, let's keep going. I mean, there's another question that kind of fits into the same. Has there been something said in an intervention that you've done, in-person intervention that has stuck with you? And then the flip side, you got a mom here wanting to know, how do you give strength to family members to kind of speak up? And, you always have that family member that's kind of, I think this is kind of draws the line to see where the strength of the family is and how willing they are to speak up. So how, twofold kind of questions, or anything ever has been said that has ever stuck with you? And how do you kind of empower families to kind of speak up and set some of those boundaries we talk about?
Okay. Yeah. The first part of the question is, has anything that comes to my mind anyway of things that have been said are obviously more recent, because that's what's, current in my mind. But we've had a couple recently that were really easy. Like the individual was absolutely 100% ready to get help. All it took was that family sitting down and one of us to say, hey, here's your opportunity. And the guy I worked with last week, I tend to tell families not to use the word gift of treatment, because in most cases, the addict or alcoholic or identified patient is not going to see this as a gift in that moment. And this guy last week, after we read the letters, and I didn't even do my normal spiel with interventions, I could just see it in his eyes. And I said, hey, bud, I know you don't know me, but you don't have to do this alone anymore. And he said, this is the best gift I've ever gotten. And we were off in the car and gone to treatment within 30 minutes. That may sit with me forever, because we assume we're going to get pushback, and we're prepared for that. But when the individual literally almost has been sitting there waiting for somebody just to get in front of them and say, now's your time, here's your opportunity. And when it happens like that, and it happens so easy, it's always really fulfilling for us as interventionists. And what was the other part of the question?
How do you kind of give strength to family members to kind of speak up and, set some boundaries?
So for me, the key is to help them identify a lot of the facts and to try and take the emotion that is tied to those facts with them out of the situation. And once we've identified a whole bunch of that stuff, it sort of gives them motivation to move forward. Once we can sort of get them on the same page and help them understand what the real problem is, like Sam said, it gives them motivation to speak up. Not that they're going to do it in the intervention itself, but just to stand up for themselves as a family unit and not to be placed in this situation where their whole lives are being sort of run by this addicted individual and their cycle of addiction. That makes sense?
Yeah. Sam, we'll go one at a time. Is there anything that's ever been said kind of during an intervention that's kind of stuck with you?
I mean, a lot. Some very funny, some very profound. One that rings back my memory. Here, mom said, she told her son, she said, my addiction to your addiction is harming both of us. And I'm going to step away from that and get my own work done. And so I can be of better maximum service, not better. So I can be of maximum service to you. So I don't pull away because I'm angry at you. I pull away because I love you. And I'm willing to get uncomfortable to show that love to you. That was pretty cool. And from an individual, God, I got a couple, man. I just had a memory pop up on my social media. It's like 10 years ago. I was at an intervention on this day. And this guy ran out of the house. You know, every family fears that their loved ones are just going to run away, right? Just going to run away. And he bolted out the door. This is one of like half a handful of people that's ever happened to. And he bolted out of the door, and the gardener wasn't part of the intervention or anything. And the gardener was the one that shifted everything. The gardener said, boy, get your ass back up in that house and quit acting like a fool and go get yourself right. And then the fella dropped his head, moseyed right back in. He came out of the bushes, right? Because he was going on a walkabout, and he came out of the bushes and had his head hung low and packed his bag and went. Then there was one where a guy, you know, we were expecting, based on what the family told us, I was expecting like this monster when we walked in the door. We walked in, and he said, where are the cameras at? Because he knew immediately what it was. He said, where are the cameras at? Isn't this some TV show called Intervention? I said, man, they're outside. They're outside. We were worried we were going to run into a monster in here. You had the camera people scared to come in. He said, well, I'm not that bad, but I ain't all that good either. So let's go get some help. And that was the intervention. It took us longer to pack and get to the airport than it did anything. Now he's sober today. Like he's sober. So
yeah,
that's awesome.
Is there anything you kind of, how do you empower or find strength for family members to, set boundaries or speak up?
Man, I think it comes down to, there's not like a particular line that I use or, there's not a said thing. If I can give them some hope, and I give them some hope by sharing my story and my family story and the story of other families that have gone through exactly the same thing that they're going through and are now on the other side of it because they followed those directions. By relating to the fears that they have, also I have noticed, because when you do this long enough, you see that there's a lot of similarities in every family system and every family thought around this thing. You can tell them what they're thinking before they tell you what they're thinking. Then they're like, wait a minute, how'd you know that? I must not be alone. I must not be the only one that feels this way. And really, it's not about me telling them anything. It's just guiding them and kind of walking along with them as they begin to understand that first time, that first little crack in the door, when they understand that their belief system or that belief that they'd attached to, so like gripping it with like death, was mistaken, and they could easily let it go. And when they do that, that builds that confidence in them, and they're like, wait a minute. And also like to start them off with like some small boundaries. Let's exercise that boundary muscle a little bit and let you see some results.
Yeah. Yeah, my brain has been foggy all day, but it just came in my mind. I mean, the thing, it was probably one of the second or third one that I didn't, by myself, because I was shadowing a lot of different interventions because I didn't have a lot of faith that I could do it by myself. And this one guy, he was about 25 years old, and the family's going around. I mean, they're laying everything on the boundaries, the letters. And this guy, goes and he kind of leans forward and kind of just says, I'm going to hold every single one of you guys accountable to what you just said. And I was like, oh, here I'm reaching for my phone, like waiting for the interventionist to be on call. Like, what do I do? And he said, you know what? I've been dying to be a part of a family that just, went around this circle. Like, this is the family that we need to be. And he's like, we're all sick. And no offense, but the sickness in this family has kept me sick and almost dead. And he's like, please hold those boundaries. I'm asking you to hold those boundaries because I'm going to need a lot of help along the way. And he just says, like, I'm dying to be part of this family. Like, I'll do whatever it takes. And like, he was the one that was telling me, like, we got to get to the airport, Jay. Like, and I'm just like, God, if they're all this, like, I'm thinking, like, this interventionist thing isn't going to be all that tough. Like, this, the TV show makes it, but I was like, holy crap, and so I just talked with him. He's like, I didn't even know who that family was. Like, that's the family I want, and been praying for. He's like, I'm a big deal. I'm the big reason why the family stays sick. But oh my God, like that, and he went on and on. I was like, man, like I've never come across anything like that. And still sober. I mean, the family has gone up to done their own work at some bridge and on site. I mean, the fact of the matter, just when you saw, like, you get people to speak up, those letters are so powerful. So, man, it just jumped in my brain. So our son went into treatment after we did an intervention on him. My question is, how do we deal with the drama he's left behind? Money owed to people, filthy living spaces, rent, so forth like that. Sam?
Man, there's this old veteran interventionist who has been around for a long time. And he's old and gray-headed. Wise, still beyond his years. And he said, you know what? Their crisis is not your crisis. Simple as that. Simple as that.
Amen.
I owed everybody money when I went to treatment. Everybody. Probably owed y'all money if you look back far enough.
I didn't want to bring it up, Sam, but I mean, are you ever going to?
That was my bed. That was my bed. Filthy living places. I went back and addressed that when I came home, and it made me sick. It was a really, really dark place, and you could still feel that dark energy when I walked into the room. And it wasn't anything inviting. It wasn't anything wonderful to look at. It was a feeling that it was what I needed to see. I needed to see that of where I was. Right. To be able to put my finger and touch and feel and smell and see like my past life. I needed that. And what we do is when families jump in there and try and clean all that up, they're playing the janitor, and they end up sweeping up their kids' self-esteem along the way. While they're cleaning up all the other mess, they clean up by mistake the self-esteem and rob their kids of self-esteem.
Sam, your pauses are just magic. And for an MC, it's really tough to kind of chime in because I don't know if you're on a pause and then you just drop some more. I mean, I just got to say, keep up. I mean, magical pause work. But for an MC, for a guy that, it's tough to know when you're done. But Brad, kind of post-intervention, dealing with, she calls the drama, kind of the owing money. How do you kind of work with the family and the individual on it?
Yeah, I mean, what Sam made me think of another similar quote, and it's their reaction to you setting boundaries is not your burden to carry. When I've said that to families in the past, obviously you want to try and say it at the right time when they're starting to understand where you're coming from, but they really start to get it. And I think, we need to face the consequences of the wreckage that we create. similar to what Sam said, when we clean up the place that they live and pay off all their debts and all the stuff that we want to do as moms and dads and loved ones because we feel like we're trying to help that person, what we're really doing is robbing them the opportunity to grow. If we remove something that is a consequence of their addiction, how do we expect them to grow and gain wisdom from facing a consequence if we take it away? It will never work that way and I mean, I know that from my own life. You know, my parents did it over and over and over again. And every time I weaseled out of something, I just kept drinking and getting high. You know, it wasn't until I was faced with the first thing that I was scared to lose that I decided to get sober.
Amen. Amen. Brad, we'll stick with you. Our daughter states that she does not want to come to family functions because she does not want to walk into an intervention. Do people usually know an intervention is going to happen, Brad?
Well, I mean, it depends on the model that you work with. You know, there is an invitational model that is out there that I have used quite a few times over the years, but not something that's my go-to. It's pretty successful when you've got someone that has some recovery in their background and they've relapsed and you're sort of trying to give them a reset because they're not going to run if they know you're coming in a lot of cases, depending on the situation. I think you have to make that call. If the family wants to do an invitational model, I don't ever just agree to it out of the gate. I tell them we'll talk about it during our pre-intervention process, and if it makes sense to everybody on the team, by the time we're done with our prep day, we'll let them know that night. But like Sam said a minute ago, if it's a surprise, the minute that they see us, the random individual that's in the room with the rest of the family members, they know exactly what's going on. I've only had maybe 3 or 4 because I ask people a lot of time when we're on the way to treatment. So did you know what was happening immediately? And almost always they say you can tell by their reaction that they knew. But every once in a while they'll be like, "Man, it took me a minute to put it together." But yeah, you know, it's hard for me to understand letting somebody know ahead of time consistently because I know if it were me, I would have bolted. There is absolutely no way I would have stuck around so my family could sit down and talk to me about my behavior. I'd have been in another state in no time.
Sam, do most people know it's coming?
No, I mean, there's some that are expecting it. You know what I do? I ask every single person when I walk into the room, I say, "Hey, do you know what this is about?" And if they say intervention, it's very telling because people that don't have a problem, their first thought isn't intervention. It's like, "What's wrong with grandma? What's wrong with Uncle Billy? Hey, is everything okay? What's going on with your family?" Or, "Hey, what's going on, guys?" It's not the first thing you think is, "Oh shit, an intervention." You know, so you really tell on yourself and you know already that it's coming. That lady that says I'm refusing to come to family functions because I'm afraid it's an intervention. Normal people don't think that way.
Nope.
You know, normal people don't. So I would suggest that family, you know, get in gear and kick it up a notch and maybe not invite her to a family function, just switch it up on her and, you know, get the intervention done because, you know, it's not normal to think that way.
Well, and also, you know, because we're teaching the family prior to the intervention, sometimes a few days, sometimes a week, you know, depending on how it's going, the family automatically starts to react a little bit different to that individual. And almost always their antennas go up.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of times they know something's coming before we get there. They're just not sure when, and they're not sure exactly what it's going to be.
Yeah.
So, and I tell families that, and they're like, "Oh, you know, he's acting different." Good. Let him know something's coming, or let her know something's coming. That's okay.
Yeah, I tell families, good point, Brad. Great point. That's why I love being a part of this platform and with interventionists because, man, it keeps me on my toes. It keeps me learning. I've learned so much from Brad, you know, from us being together. And
ditto, both ways.
You know, it's really good. It's a really good thing. But you know, it's shit. I forgot what I was going to say. I was at Brad many compliments.
Showering me with compliments.
Does shower compliments cascading over his.
I think anyone that kind of thinks an intervention is on the horizon is subconsciously really trying to ask for help. I mean, doesn't have the guts to say, "Hey, I want to go to treatment." But I've had a couple people just say, like, "Man, I was hoping it was an intervention because I mean, I put up a fight, but I was going to go, and you knew that." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I mean, I knew you were going to, you know."
Well,
I think they subconsciously want to help.
Oh, I know. Is that and every time I lose my train of thought, man, I think I have Alzheimer's. That's where my head goes. Just not a busy day, nothing like that. It's straight Alzheimer's.
worst case scenario.
Yeah, I got Alzheimer's. But what I like the families to, and I tell the families going into this thing is like, look, the work doesn't start on intervention day. It starts before. Like I want the individual, like Brad said, I want that individual to know that things are different. So when they do make the approach, when the family does sit down with them, that they know, like it just to keep things 100% as is leading up to intervention day, and then they spring all that on them. They may not believe it, but if they start changing communication, maybe put some smaller boundaries in place before the intervention, switch up how they're reacting to them, the individual's going to know something's up. Something is up.
And it can be as simple as one conversation with their mom, and that mom doesn't say the same thing she said a million times on that one call. I can remember, like in my own addiction, like, whoa, how come she didn't say the same crap she always says? What's happening here?
Mm-hmm.
We know. Sam, how do you know when someone has reached their quote unquote bottom? My brother continues to refuse any help, yet continues to go deeper and deeper in an addiction. Is death a bottom for some?
I mean, unfortunately, not trying to sound like the Grim Reaper here, but unfortunately, yeah. I mean, this is an illness where people die. This is an illness where people die regardless of what you do. It's a thing that people are just not going to make it through, unfortunately. But I think that people are looking at the outside bottoms of an individual and are not looking at the internal bottoms and the emotional bottom. I mean, I emotionally bottomed out a while before I turned the page, you know. But I was still just trying to kick along. You know, I lived in a trailer with a single wide trailer with a hole in the floor, and I couldn't pay rent on that. I had stolen cable, and I couldn't see my kids, and my truck looked like I was riding around in a dumpster. You know, it's like, and I couldn't keep a job, and I was self-employed. You know, so I mean, it was like I was hitting walls everywhere I went. The thing that was important to me was, and when I'm working with families, is that, and with this question that was asked, is I'm curious as to know how have they communicated the desire to help them. How have they offered the gift of help, right? How have they offered that, or have they offered that? Or are they just waiting on him let's let him hit his bottom? Because in that scenario, more than likely, like an individual will die left unchecked.
Yeah.
Pause over.
Brad, thank you. We need a sign. Brad, take it away.
So I was talking to this kid today that I brought over to treatment, and you know, we talk about this a lot, but I don't think it can ever be understated. Or you know, with the landscape the way it is with fentanyl out here today, it's in everything, and things are changing. And I was talking to this kid, and you know, he was telling me he's 21 years old, and I said, how many friends have you had that you lost to fentanyl? He said, man, I lost count a long time ago. You know, it's different than it was 15, 20 years ago. And I have a whole bottom spiel that you guys have heard before. People tend to think of bottom as an event. It's a DUI or an arrest or a loss of a relationship or a loss of a job or whatever, right? And for me and for most people that I've talked to that are in recovery long term will tell you that it really wasn't an event, because I had a bunch of events in my life prior to me getting sober that should have been my bottom, and that didn't change anything. My bottom was when all of a sudden I had a feeling, and that feeling told somehow it all became clear at that moment in time that it was my decisions that had gotten me to the place in life where I was, and that the only person that could do anything about those decisions or change that path was me. And when I realized that, when I had that feeling, change immediately began. Shortly thereafter, I made a decision to myself to do everything these people told me in this treatment center, whether I believed it or not. And a lot of the stuff they were telling me to do, I had absolutely no belief whatsoever that it was going to work for me. Fortunately for me, I was wrong on almost everything that I had wanted to shoot down. But waiting for something to happen, for somebody to snap out of this active addiction, where we know that their brain is affected to a point where the frontal lobe and the reasoning part of their brain isn't even working properly. So if you think about it from a family standpoint or loved one standpoint, we know the brain's not working properly, but yet we're going to sit back and wait for some event to hopefully have this person all of a sudden look at life differently and say, I'm going to do whatever it takes to get better. It doesn't work that way. Like, that's why interventions work, is because we bring a unified front and a message to that person that says, hey, bud, we love you. Like, you might not realize how much we love you because you're sick right now, but this is about us giving you an opportunity to get everything you want out of life. I was never going to come to that realization on my own. Like, it took a feeling. And for most of us out there in active addiction, I think it takes a show of love and support that I personally had forgotten that was even there. Like, I knew my family loved me, right? But like, I didn't realize it was like it is. And I surely didn't realize that it was the way we present interventions today. Like, that show of love and support is what changed so many people's lives that we've worked with. And I know that Sam has too, and you too, Jay. It's just, there's just a lot of misconceptions about how we think about addiction, how we deal with addiction, and what we do. And it's actually a fairly simple process. It just takes guidance from somebody that's not emotionally attached to that person. Because when I had dealt with this exact situation with my own loved one, with my ex-wife, I had been sober for over a decade, and I blew it. I literally blew it. I was consumed with it 100%, and I couldn't even function at work. And when I got through that process and realized how bad I blew it, even with all that experience in recovery, it was like, okay, whoa, what about everybody else out there that doesn't have any experience? If I couldn't do it with all my resources at the time, how do we help these people that have no roadmap? And I think that was, that's why we do it, is because we know how hard it is to do it on your own, even if you have a whole lot of self-awareness around the situation.
Now, you've said it a couple of times. I wanted to go back to it, kind of like how we're scaring families, kind of when it comes to doing interventions and how we're presenting it. I heard you just say, is this a kind of a call to action, or are you presenting it or doing anything different, Brian?
What do you mean? Like, as far as how we speak with families on the front end?
Yeah, so you said early in the show, maybe I made it up, that you think that we kind of scare people. I don't know exactly.
Well, I think that sometimes when we talk about how much impact the family can have on changing the dynamic and the system of addiction, and we talk about them doing a bunch of work, I think sometimes that scares them. And they would rather look at the problem differently and say, this is Johnny's problem. He's the one that needs to go to treatment. This is not our problem, but it is. It's everybody's problem. And the truth is, the only power any family member has to help affect their loved one's change is to change the way they have been reacting, because they can't control the loved one, right? So if they change the way they've reacted and do some work on their own, then they can get better. And the loved one's usually going to get better, even if it's not right in that moment. Like all we're teaching families is to understand what power they have. And the only power they have is themselves and how they react.
Yeah, I like that. Well, we fired through the questions. Anything, did you remember anything, Sam? Is there anything that you want to say that you haven't gotten out?
There was a minute ago, but I forgot.
How did I know that was going to be the answer? How did I know? Well, Burning Desires, anything kind of hit a chord with you, either one? Brad, Sam, or should we just let everyone go?
Man, I feel like there's something we should say. You know? Because now you just set it up to where we're just leaving people.
Well,
We don't
sometimes
wanna
I need
leave
to
people.
work. Sometimes I need to work on my MC skills, but I also will say sometimes silence says it all.
Ooh, doesn't it though? I'm experiencing that right now.
Yeah.
Is that towards me or
No?
Okay, because I take everything personal.
Yeah,
I'm very sensitive.
everything.
Well, this has been really. I mean, you got plenty of space to stretch out. Going 3 deep instead of 4. You don't have the Hollywood squares comment from Sam that gets every week. But gentlemen, another well done job this week. We do this every Tuesday night, intervening weekly until we come up with a clever name. But gentlemen, thanks for your insight.
Yeah.
Glad to be here. Thanks. There's a ton of hope out there. That can be our message.
God, see, that could have been a good thing to say before signing off. But Brad, you brought it. You get the gold star tonight, just so you know. You brought it.